Welcome. My name is Janice Arch. I'm the current chapter president of Wild Ones Greater Cleveland. Tonight we have a lovely presentation about trees in honor of Arbor Day that we will be sharing with you. But first, I just want to give a quick introduction on what Wild Ones is. We're a national nonprofit that advocates for native landscapes and plants through education, advocacy, and collaborative action. We are the Greater Cleveland chapter, and we cover essentially most of Northeast Ohio, anywhere from Sandusky down to Worcester. The only part that we don't cover is Youngstown. They have their own chapter. But we are all volunteer members here at Wild Ones in our chapter. And our main goal is to provide opportunities like this presentation tonight and any of our events and workshops free and open to the public. And we do that through membership and through some fundraising opportunities that we have within our chapter. So tonight, we're going to hear from Christopher from Summit Metro Parks about native Ohio trees. And just a quick intro is that Wild Ones Greater Cleveland has partnered with Summit Metro Parks to be one of their Wild Backyards partners, which I'm sure Christopher can do a much better job of explaining the Wild Backyards program better than I can. But Summit Metro Parks is a big advocate for planting native as well. So our missions really align in that aspect, which makes us great partners because we want to see a thriving, diverse ecosystem, not just in our parks, but also in our backyards. And then also, I was just gonna read a quick blip about the history of Arbor Day, and this is straight from the Arbor Day Foundation, just to give a little background of why we're here and why we want to celebrate trees. So the Arbor Day Foundation says that while most holidays celebrate something that has already happened and is worth remembering, Arbor Day represents a hope for the future. The simple act of planting a tree represents a belief that the tree will grow to provide us with clean air and water, cooling shade, habitat for wildlife, healthier communities, and endless natural beauty, all for the better tomorrow. So in case I learned that Arbor Day kind of first came up all the way back in 1872, where a gentleman wanted to have a day to celebrate trees in Nebraska. So who knew? And then by 1920, there were 45 states or territories that were also on board for having an official Arbor Day holiday within their state. So that's just a little background of how long Arbor Day has been going on to celebrate our lovely trees. And just real quick, if we have anybody on the call tonight who is not a Wild Ones Greater Cleveland member, I will put a link in the chat, but this is a QR code that will send you to sign up to become a member. You can also, we're on all social media platforms, so feel free to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and give us a follow, interact with us. We always like to answer questions or anything like that if you have anything for us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing. And you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Janice. I will start sharing. Need to expand this here. So you know, as it will say on this screen here in a moment when I get it up, and I'm a biologist with Summit Metro Parks. What it doesn't say is I've been there, I think now 5.5 years. Most of what I do at Summit Metro Parks is manage reforestation projects. I manage our small nursery in Twinsburg, where we cultivate native species from throughout our parks. Some of those are for giveaways to the public, and others are rare, threatened, and endangered species rescue efforts. And then the other thing I spend a lot of my time doing is promoting wild backyards, which, as Janice said, is very similar to what Wild Ones does, which makes Wild Ones Greater Cleveland chapter such a great partner. And they were one of our first Wild Backyards partners in the partner program. So I'm very pleased to be here this evening. And just before moving into For the Love of Trees, for anybody who is maybe unfamiliar with different park districts and what specifically they do, or Summit Metro Parks, I guess in specific, what we do is we conserve, sustainably manage, and value natural resources for the health and enjoyment of our community, and inspire people to connect with nature through clean and safe parks. And as it happens, a lot of that really has directly to do with the health of our ecosystems and the services that those ecosystems provide. So, moving on to For the Love of Trees, or why we love trees. A lot of it, really is rooted, no pun intended, but I'll take it, is rooted in the history of this place. So, Ohio was once 95% forested, uh, and we're now closer to 30% tree cover. So a pretty similar story to the wetlands in the state, a little bit less drastic than the wetlands in the state, but where we've lost 95% of wetlands over about the past 120 years. But still fairly drastic to go from 95% forest cover to 30% cover. But thanks to wonderful organizations like Wild Ones Greater Cleveland chapter, and in Summit County specifically, Keep Akron Beautiful. Um, there is a big push to increase that coverage. So tree cover is a lot of what we deal with at the parks. As I mentioned, I deal with a lot of reforestation projects. Um, the big push at Summit Metro Parks started in 2021. So this was to commemorate our centennial. The state of Ohio actually put into law in 19 well so need to make sure I don't get this wrong. I believe it's 1919 the law went into place. 2 years later, Summit Metro Parks was established as a park district. Uh, but the state of Ohio put into law public funding for the establishment of public parks. And the way that public parks, county level park districts are funded is through property taxes. So in 2021, uh, we were 100 years old and we wanted to plant 100 acres. So that's what we did. We started in 2021 with this reforestation push and planted about 20,000 trees and shrubs. It's actually the number is actually a little bit more than that, uh, but we account for mortality. We usually plant more than what we anticipate or what we would want the final stem density to be in a forest. But it's about 20,000 trees per acre. So then we took about a year off, 2022, mostly monitoring the successes and in some places failures of reforestation efforts in the parks from that 2021 push, which we called our Centennial Groves. But then we picked it back up in 2023 with 8 acres and 2,500 trees. And last year again with 2.6 acres, 800 trees. And this year, we have more reforestation projects slated for the fall. It will still end up a little bit less than the acreage that we had last year, but so far this year, this was just April 10th. We planted 500 trees and shrubs on zero point 0.7 acres. So most of these areas you can you can see in this lower right hand picture here, there are areas that at some point in the park's past were mowed, and then we relaxed that disturbance regime, either because public usage had changed in that area, um, or increasingly because we're trying to support biodiversity. So we would stop mowing, and then watch these no-mow areas and see if there was any natural tree recruitment. And in any area where we weren't seeing natural tree recruitment, um, that's where we'd go and plant trees. And there are a lot of reasons why natural recruitment doesn't occur. Some of the stressors at those sites do carry over into our planting efforts, which is why we might not have great establishment in one planting relative to another. Um, but of our more than 15,000 acres that we manage at Summit Metro Parks, we're really trying to get bit by bit closer to that 95% forest cover. Um, and we plant prairies and meadows as well. But of course, at least from a historical perspective, that covered a lot less of the area in Summit County than forest, whether upland forest or wetland forest. So while we do have several parks in urban areas, what we do not have is many street trees. Um, and this is something that's very relevant today. There are a lot of local and regional municipal efforts to restore street tree canopy. Um, so Summit Metro Parks is collaborating with municipalities. There are consulting firms involved. There are charities or nonprofits, and individual landowners who are all sort of collaborating to restore trees along the streets, which is really, um, anybody with a little woodlot on their own personal property can appreciate those trees. But besides some of the provisioning services, which I'll talk a little bit about later, oxygen provision, rainfall interception, that sort of thing. Uh, the 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 up close enjoyment of those trees is not shared by everybody. Even your commute to work is much more enjoyable, at least in my experience, when you get to drive under a tree canopy, relative to a more barren appearing landscape. So this is an important push that's really gaining steam. And when I talk about, being a Summit County Park District, when I talk about street tree canopy, um, and canopy cover, I'm usually talking about Akron specifically and Summit County at large. Although we do, with other park districts, collaborate, share data. We're all sort of working on similar things at the same time, trying to refine and improve our processes, so that we can get more trees out on the landscape. Um, but one of the important things we need to do is make projections for future tree cover and then plan for that replacement, so that we have an ultimate increase in tree cover. And that's something that unfortunately hadn't been addressed too intensely in the past, which is why we've lost so many street trees to date. So, most of the street trees that come down, whether from disease or they're threatening a structure, they're getting in the way of utility lines, something like that. Most of these trees were planted over 100 years ago. So it takes time, of course, for a sapling that's planted to get to sufficient size to really provide those services which we enjoy. So we're playing a game of catch up now. Um, but fortunately, this was a little bit more than a year ago, and you may have heard that Ohio Department of Natural Resources will be reopening the Buckeye State Tree Nursery. That was closed about 20 years ago, but they will be poised to produce about 500,000 tree seedlings annually. And a lot of those are going to go to conservation agencies like Summit Metro Parks, and as well as native nurseries. So, native trees, straight species native trees, will be a lot more accessible to everybody. Um, and as I said, this is really picking up steam. There's a lot of momentum in getting to where we need to be, but there is also a long way to go. So, uh, let's see. Here we are on this graph here at the 40th percentile um, for tree canopy. And this is statewide. This is Ohio's tree canopy. And there are a lot of factors to account for why North Dakota has so much less. Uh, and I said it's statewide, but it's statewide urban areas. Why North Dakota has so much less urban tree cover than, say, Maine. So you wouldn't expect every state to have the same urban tree cover. But wouldn't it be great to be more well known for our tree-lined streets in Northeast Ohio than we are for having a river that caught fire several times? The point here is that there's a lot of room to grow. Uh, and taking it beyond just urban canopy cover, and trees in specific, between the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, Summit Metro Parks, and several other conservancies in Summit County, we have just over 13% of the area conserved for nature. And the remaining 87% is a lot of developed land and some agriculture. But that developed land represents an immense opportunity to get more tree cover. So if in addition to, say, urban street tree planting, we focus on developed open space and developed low intensity space, which is basically residential and low density commercial land, we can more than double the space for nature in this county. And it's going to be a similar situation county to county. Um, a more developed county, say Franklin County, with a much larger um, larger urban footprint. Maybe there's going to be less available low intensity space to rewild, but generally it's the same picture across Northeast Ohio. We have a lot of space that's maintained in a relatively sterile sort of landscape. It's a green space, but it's not really supporting biodiversity, and it's not supporting human populations the same way that it could be. Um, so the ecologist E.O. Wilson estimated that to save 80% of the world's species, including trees and everything we get from those trees, we would need to preserve about 50% of the land for nature. And then nature, it's often, depending on who you ask, it's often attributed with intrinsic value. And now, I'm not sure that's true from a factual standpoint. Although that's how I feel about it. I appreciate nature. I'm sure everybody here tonight appreciates nature. But even if that were true, that nature has intrinsic value, it's not necessarily that compelling of an argument for conservation for people who wouldn't otherwise it's not necessarily that compelling an argument for people who really love a lush green lawn, and don't want to have to blow leaves. Um, so that's why we tend to use this ecosystem services approach as a persuasive tool in getting people to realize what it is that trees do for them. So why do we love trees? What do they do for us? It's fairly obvious, I think, in light of the staggering loss of trees across the landscape, why we would want to replace them. I mean, they're interesting. They provide oxygen. They provide shade, but they do so much more. And when we're qualifying the benefits of trees, I find it really helpful to use this approach, especially to spell out some of the benefits that we don't think about as often, or speak about as often. So, the ecosystem services approach, it anthropocentrically contextualizes the benefits of nature as a way of quantifying the value of those benefits to humanity, and places those services into four categories, which are here on the left: provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services. So this approach basically just helps to explain, what does nature do for me? For somebody who doesn't know or maybe doesn't think about nature in this way, it helps to explain that, and in some cases even puts a dollar value on those services. So this approach, it has pros and it has cons, like anything, but it is really good at simplifying the complex services of nature and teasing out some benefits that, like I said, we don't talk about as often, or we don't think about as often. So provisioning services, um, specifically from trees, we get a lot. And these things are fairly straightforward. But if you go to the furniture store to get a desk or a bed, you know, you- most people probably are not thinking about the timber that went into constructing that piece of furniture. In our mo- what are what are mostly modern construction houses, at least in a lot of newer developments, um, we're not often thinking about the timber that goes into framing that house. It's a different question entirely for an older home, a stone home. But in modern construction, all that timber is hidden. You might see, some woodwork in the trim, if it's not painted over, or if it's even real wood. A lot of times it's plastic. um, but the source of these building materials is often kind of hidden from our sight, so we're not necessarily thinking about it, even though it's intuitive, or rather apparent. If you do spend the time to think about it, it's kind of hidden from view. So that's one of the biggest resources that we get from trees. We have a lot of renewable forest plantations that allow us to continue to harvest and replenish that resource over time. Of course, there are trade-offs there, um, but it's a better approach than constantly seeking out older forests to extract that resource, and then we have no more older forests. But there are other resources that again, it's if you spend the time to think about it, it's fairly apparent, but most people just don't spend a lot of time thinking about these things. Uh, so I'm a forager, or at least I used to be. Now I have most of the native plants that I would forage from on my own landscape. But that's how I first got interested in botany, was finding edible mushrooms. And then that got me into thinking about what edible plants are out there, what parts of the plants can I eat, what do they taste like, what do they smell like. And trees are where we get almost all of the nuts that we eat, with the exception of peanuts. But we have North American tree species, pecans, hickories, um, walnuts, butternuts, and even acorns. Acorns were used heavily by indigenous people, and there are some acorn flour products available uh, commercially right now. It's not something that you encounter that often, but nuts, flowers, fruits, saps. Geauga County, where I live, is known for its maple syrup production. There's nectar for honey. There are a lot of apiaries. Of course, all across the landscape. So these are things that we're getting directly from trees, and they're also either reducing our they're either something that's essential for nutrition in some way, or they're reducing our uh, bill at the grocery store, or they're novel foods that kind of spice up a meal. They're interesting, and in some cases, like with nectar for honey, some of the tree fruits and nuts and maple syrup, they're really large industries. So very easy to put a dollar figure on that, and that can be a more compelling argument for conservation and planting trees for some folks um, than oxygen. Uh, of course, there's also fiber for paper and textiles. There's wood fuel. A lot of homes are heated increasingly by pelletized waste wood. Um, there's revenue from ecotourism and other forms of tourism and commerce, which are improved by tree cover. And then there are medicines derived from trees. So these are some of the provisioning services that we get specifically from trees. Then there are regulating services like air purification, rain interception, water filtration, temperature moderation, which is very important, especially in urban contexts, reducing that urban heat island effect if you have a sufficient canopy. There's erosion and flood control, climate regulation, and of course, carbon sequestration. And these are at the forefront, I think, of especially the climate change conversation. These are services that um, people think about even if they don't want to sometimes. Um, so maybe a little bit more prone to be in a newspaper headline than say the economic value of maple syrup in Geauga County. Um, but this one, the cultural ecosystem services or cultural services, this is one that really I think is really important and does not get a lot of airtime. Um, so cultural services, they're less tangible, but they're just as important. And these are benefits like recreation, educational opportunities. There are indirect health benefits thanks to things like lower ambient temperatures, buffered noise pollution, even reduction in air pollution. But also, trees can provide a sense of place. So, especially as you move from um, place to place across the landscape, the different geology and climate supports a different community of trees, and that trifecta right there is in and of itself what creates that sense of place. That's why plant communities are different here than they are over there. Um, and so maintaining that sense of place, maintaining that heterogeneity across the landscape, I think is really important. I would not, and I think many people would feel the same. It wouldn't be as interesting to travel to different places, certainly not for things like ecotourism, if everything looked the same. If you had the same trees everywhere, the same plants, the same birds, it just wouldn't be as interesting. Um, so that sense of place, I think, is really an important piece. But other cultural services that trees provide aesthetic value, spiritual connections, historic connections, and then they're often used as monuments. So people plant trees to mark an occasion, and then as the tree grows, it both memorializes that occasion or that event, and then also marks the passage of time, which I think is a really interesting aspect of trees. Um, and I always find it so cool when somebody says, "Oh, I planted this tree 30 years ago when my daughter was born, and look at how, look at how big the tree is now." And getting at these cultural services, um, the cultural services of trees are acknowledged by cultures across the world with words expressing deep and rare emotions. And so I always love to see these odd memes come by on some social media platform with a list of words for often inexpressed feelings, like the Welsh heraeth. I'm sure I'm butchering this word, but I'm just going to go with it. So heraeth is a deeply felt connection to one's homeland, casting its forests and landscape in a magical glow. Um, Interestingly, that also infers some uncertainty about the future fate of the landscape, which is where we find ourselves today, which is why Wild Ones Greater Cleveland does what it does, which is why Summit Metro Parks does what we do. Um, and it's why you folks in the audience also do what you do. So there is some uncertainty, but we're working towards getting this, restoring this deeply felt connection. There's also the German Vereinsamkeit, which is the feeling of being alone in the woods. I really like that. I really appreciate that. And if you really love Vereinsamkeit, you might be called a nemophilist. A nemophilist is a haunter of the woods, one who loves the forest and its beauty and solitude. Um, and there are dozens more of these words across several languages that speak to the essence of the cultural services trees provide. Um, so finally, then we have the supporting services. Uh, and supporting services from trees are things like, um, they're the services that directly facilitate other parts of the ecosystem to function as they do. So things like, and some of these like photosynthesis, they're not specific to trees, but several of them are. Photosynthesis, of course, conversion of the sun's energy into something that we can consume. Genetic resources for ecosystem resiliency. Um, and I don't have a good example from a tree right now. Well, there is one, but the most recent example of genetic resources from nature would be the Ozempic, and I can't remember the other trade name. This latest class of diet drugs, they come from the Gila monster from the Southwest American desert. Um, and so it's really important to maintain biodiversity, maintain all of the different pieces of biodiversity, not just for provisioning services, cultural services, things like that, but also the we use them in a very real way. And if we eliminate these resources, then that could be some medicine in the future that we're not going to have access to. And I thought of the tree example as I was talking about the Gila monster. Aspirin, salicylic acid, comes from willows. And it's actually named after the willow genus Salix. These things are very important and something I don't think a lot of people think about. Just like the cultural services. Um, er, so, well, anyway, moving on. So, soil formation, of course, another one. As all of the trees, and especially here in the eastern deciduous forest, As all of the trees senesce and the leaves fall to the ground, those leaves break down, and those leaves and the life, the soil biota that help to break down those leaves in concert with the geology, weathering of the bedrock. That is what makes soil. Um, so really important service from trees, nutrient and water cycling, and then significantly food and shelter for wildlife. So that's pollinators and the wildlife that feed on leaf-eating insects, and a whole slew of other critters we often don't think of. So, a single tree planted, it contributes to all of the above ecosystem services, but then also provides the ability for the species that live on it to perform their ecosystem services. So then using this approach, using the ecosystem service approach, you could say that this tree here, which is our signal bur oak, it's our signal oak tree in Cascade Valley Metro Park. It's a bur oak tree. Um, you could say that that tree provides the city of Akron with, let's just say, $10,000 worth of rainwater interception per year. Rainwater that would otherwise enter the sewer system, have to go through wastewater treatment, and there's a dollar value attached to that. So this commodification of nature, I do think it's a double-edged sword because it can be used to put a dollar figure on carbon credit or stormwater schemes, which can disproportionately burden individuals and households relative to businesses and governments. Um, so taken with a grain of salt, but it's still an important and valuable way to contextualize the importance of nature for say the uninitiated, the people who just love their turf and haven't, the light bulb hasn't clicked on yet. Why it might be better to have a tree uh, than grass. Um, but then on the other hand, so that's the potential dark side of the ecosystem services approach. But on the other hand, when we view this holistically or somewhat holistically, this approach, ecosystem services approach, it allows us to see that trees do so much heavy lifting in meeting human needs. Uh, and they'll continue to do so as long as we make more space for nature and responsibly conserve what we have. But then, and this is why organizations like Wild Ones and Summit Metro Parks do what we do um, with regards to promoting native species. Not all trees are created equal. So when taken as a whole, the trees that belong here perform more ecosystem services than their recently introduced counterparts. Uh, so the services here in red are the ones that are lost by planting non-native trees relative to native trees. Um, as we discussed, that sense of place, some of the history of a place, biodiversity support being a really massive impact uh, of planting native trees relative to non-native. And so to illustrate that concept, we have a a graphic for the Wild Backyards Initiative, which this is really ugly. It's very preliminary. It's still a work in progress, and it's also still missing a lot of information. But it will do to illustrate the concept for tonight. So what you're looking at here in the center, that red oval, um, that is uh, that's garlic mustard right there. And then around here, those are all of the primary consumers that feed off of the primary producer garlic mustard. So this is about 49 different species. But 2/5 of the species that garlic mustard supports, they themselves are non-native. And you compare that trophic map with a native species, even a toxic native species like bloodroot here in the center. And this native plant, even though it's toxic, supports 56 primary consumers, and only 5 of those are introduced. Uh, Also, interestingly, it has potentially 125 different mycorrhizal associations. Um, so all of those mushrooms, or many of the mushrooms that I first became interested in botany through, many of those wouldn't be present without native trees to support them. And then you compare that again, or compare those two species again with this one in the center here, which is swamp milkweed. Um, and that primary producer supports 130 different primary consumers, and only 10 of those are introduced. So there's really a drastic difference between the different wildlife that's supported by native species relative to non-native species. And then where it gets really sort of mind-blowing is, there we go, uh, is each of these primary consumers also supports a whole nother trophic web of wildlife that either predates upon it or parasitizes it, or uses its abandoned nest as habitat, that sort of thing. And then each of those species in the entire trophic web also provides its own ecosystem services to humanity. Um, so when you map it out in this way, uh, it really presents an exponential difference in the value we get from native trees relative to non-native trees. Um, and so native plants, I referenced geology and climate before. Native plants, along with local geology and climate, they're the foundation for all of the nature that we know, love, and upon which we depend. So it's so important to plant trees, and so much more important to plant native trees when we're planting trees. Uh, so planting trees and planting native, what's wonderful about these approaches, there are things that we can do in our own backyards. We can observe the effects in real time. Um, and in some cases, we can even harvest food from them, from trees we planted within our own lifetimes. The birds usually get to my service berries first, but that's one that I've enjoyed in my landscape. I have butternut trees out there. They haven't started producing yet, but I expect them to start producing in another 3 or 4 years. Um, so there's a lot that we can do without any legislation, without any need for new technology, without any um, punitive fee systems. We can really just set about doing this work, and then watch the results in real time and benefit from this work. Um, and it's not just, we are talking about trees tonight, but it's not the sense of place that I mentioned before, that cultural service. And the sense of place is not just about the trees that you see, the plant communities that you see. It's also it also comes from the sights and sounds of the wildlife using those plants, the seasonality of the ecological relationships that are occurring with those plants, and then how those differ from one place to another. Um, so it has taken a lot of time and cultural changes to get where we are today, from people tied closely with trees and all that they provide, to a culture of sterility and control. And I think back to the Scarlet Letter. If you haven't read it, Nathaniel Hawthorne used the forest as a symbol of darkness and sin. And that fear of the wild, I think, has a lot to do with why we're not now playing catch up with the canopy. There are other drivers too, of course, but I think it really all comes down to mindset. And fortunately, that's something that in some ways is more difficult to change. But once that paradigm shift is accomplished, then everything else, it's downhill from there. It's all easier from there. The solutions are available, and we just need to implement them. So, canopy loss and the resultant biodiversity loss, they're troubling symptoms of our land use patterns and human habits, but it's not really humanity and its survival and reproduction that's the problem per se. It's just this mindset. Um, so that's why, inspired by organizations like Wild Ones and the National Wildlife Federation. There are several of these initiatives across the nation and across the world. That's why we created the Wild Backyards Initiative, which really just comes down to planting native, reducing non-natives, providing habitat, reducing your ecological footprint, and then spreading the word. Um, and launching off of this Wild Backyards springboard, we created the Wild Backyards Partnership Program. As I mentioned, Wild Ones Greater Cleveland chapter is one of our first partners. And we are trying really hard to get some municipal partners as well. So we work with municipalities to consult on their street tree selections. Taking what's shown here, what was an almost entirely non-native street tree planting list, and we went through and did the research and changed the list to an exclusively native and native R planting list. Um, and there was a slight decrease in the total number of tree species suitable to plant in urban environments. But still, this list is about 180 species long, so that's pretty good. That gives municipalities a lot to work with. And that also gives uh, homeowners living in more urbanized areas a lot to work with, a lot to choose from when trying to select a tree for their landscape. So we'll keep promoting native planting, canopy restoration, and rewilding to anyone who will listen. Um, all right, so that about wraps it up. The QR code here on the bottom left will take you directly to our Wild Backyard site. You can sign up for monthly emails to learn more about a variety of topics. I shouldn't say monthly, quarterly emails. Um, or check out these favorite book selections to learn about the importance of native plants if you're not already on the bus, and how to get started on your next home landscaping project. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for joining tonight, and Janice and Wild Ones Greater Cleveland chapter for the invitation.
Oh, I thought I unmuted myself. Thank you, Christopher. That was so good.
Oh, thank you.
I know I have a few questions, but I was going to open it up to anyone else on the call. Here, if you have any questions, does anybody have any questions or comments or anything? Don't be shy. All right, I will start us off with a question. So you mentioned, and this got me very excited, and I think possibly a few other Wild Ones leadership members who are on right now as well. You mentioned the Buckeye Tree Native Nursery. Um, so do you know, is that going to be locally around here, or is that down near Columbus?
You know, I do not know. I haven't followed up. I
Okay.
know it used to be, I want to say it was Licking County, uh, before it closed 20 years ago.
Okay.
My assumption is that it will be closer to Columbus. Um, but I know at least to start, they're not planning on selling retail.
Yeah.
But they do plan to be open to retail customers over time.
Okay. Yeah, I know. you mentioned for conservation and restoration efforts, and then also to the native plant nurseries. So I know that's always a question we get from people is like, where can I buy, the bigger stuff, not just perennials. So that's very exciting if that's getting started back up for being able to um, have as a resource locally. Someone asked in the comments, was it 13 or 35% of Summit County that's conserved for nature?
So so it is 13% currently. And we could get to about 35% if we converted 100% of that low intensity landscape to some sort of conservation. Even including, naturalizations of people's front and backyards.
Right.
And I did want to say, just before I forget about larger trees in the meantime. So for anybody who's interested, of course we can't promote any one business, um, but for that sort of stock, there's a nursery in Pennsylvania called Ark Wild. There's a nursery in Indiana called um Woody Warehouse. And there's one up in Perry called Klein Nursery, which was just bought by Petites. Now they are wholesale only, but if you have a landscaper working on your property, they will be able to buy those trees from Klein. And they also sell some non-native stuff, so you just need to be careful to make sure that it's native.
Yeah, Klein was always big on, making their own new cultivars, and such. So, but yeah,
Mhm.
they are a good source. I wrote down the other two. Um, it looks like someone in the comments mentioned it'll be in Zanesville. Um, so that's exciting.
Oh.
Someone else mentioned the soil and water conservation districts. They do have the tree and shrub sales. The only thing, and I've purchased from those, the stuff you get from there is usually so small, which is
Mhm.
great because you get to see it grow. But I know some people, they want to pay um, more to have that instant impact. Um, but another question I had, so the charts that you were sharing, which there was a few comments about how awesome those were, like the garlic mustard versus the bloodroot, native versus non-native. What did you call those?
Um, Trophic webs,
Trophic webs. Okay.
which is so so a standard trophic web might take one. You might see it presented in a couple of different ways. One of the most common ways to present it is just in a more generalized concept where you have plants as the primary producers, and then you show primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers.
Hmm.
When trying to map out the actual species involved in ecological relationships, that's where it gets um, that's where it gets so complex, and you have potentially hundreds of different species involved.
Yeah, I I'm more of a visual person, and just being able to see how that worked from varying, from varying species was very very beneficial.
Oh,
So
awesome.
thank you for it. I thought those were great. Um and then I just had to say that for my work we do some reforestation work, and I really loved your term stem density for, adding back in those trees. So I might start using that um in my 9 to 5 as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Uh that but does any other questions? Did we spark anything from anybody while we were discussing some things? right. Well, thanks everybody for being here tonight and for joining us. And thank you, Christopher and Summit Metro Parks, for presenting this wonderful presentation for us. So we appreciate you. We're glad that we're partners, and we look forward to um, doing some more things like this in the future, possibly. So thank you.
Yeah, we look forward to it as well. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.